Greetings, everyone. I am Kirby Player, and welcome to our Faculty Commons meeting today. The format I'm going to take today is more of a discussion, and it's interesting to have such a discussion, having experts from various areas in the room, such as history or engineering or education. But the topics we've had this semester, I think, have led to this idea when Melissa first contacted me about presenting. Obviously, being from the College of Agriculture, the concept of tilling and keeping or cultivating is something that has always intrigued me. And to lead off with the discussion so you can have an understanding of who I am and where I'm coming from as I share this topic with you, I'm wanting us to think about mankind's first profession, our institution here at Clemson, where you're planted, doing your vocation, your calling, and also the principle of stewardship as educators, and that the whole concept of tilling and keeping is at its core God's first example of stewardship to mankind in Genesis. To give you an idea about who I am and where I come from, I'm originally a farm boy from Lee County, South Carolina, which is in the PD of our state, about an hour northeast of Columbia. I grew up on a corn, cotton, wheat, and soybean farm. We also had pigs, cows, and chickens back in the day when a diversified family farm was operable up until about the mid-'80s or so. We had all of those, but now we're primarily a row crop farm, which the diversification of agriculture has moved toward expertise, as many fields have. And my family, my grandfather graduated from Clemson in 1919 with a 2-year degree in agronomy. My father in 1948 with a degree in agronomy. My brother in 78, me in 83, aunts, uncles, cousins. We truly are what's referred to as a land grant legacy family. So and what I mean by that is we were a rural background to whom none had gone to college until the land grant system came into being. And the interesting thing, there were 9 children in my father's family and 4 in my mother's, all from rural parts of South Carolina, and they all got educations primarily through land grant college or the public college system, but really until then it had not happened. So my roots to Clemson and agriculture are very deep. But what I find in a modern land grant institution, when you talk to the majority faculty or students about agriculture or land grant, they look at you as if you're an alien that has come from outer space into this institution that is hip and with it. And who are y'all? Some of you may have seen the funny cartoon that shows Clem's son, and it has this guy in overalls with a hat, and then next to him is this little boy with a straw coming out of his face with a little hat on and a pennant. That's Clem's son. So this is Clem, that's kind of a name, and this is his son. That's kind of an image that we have struggled with agriculture. But what I want to do today is hopefully give you in Faculty Commons something to think about related to principles that are biblically based from agricultural ideas that we see transported through the New Testament, and then talk a little bit about our garden, where we are planted here at Clemson University, and what it takes for us to be stewards of the talents, gifts, resources, and skills we have as we consider our role here at Clemson University. When we look at the biblical call for stewards and the fall of man, the reality is in Genesis. Those of us in agriculture strongly argue that the very first profession ever given to mankind was that of being a farmer. There's all kind of arguments you'll find as you go and you read articles from theologians on this, the concept of, was there really farming in the garden, or were Adam and Eve just walking around picking up fruit and grabbing seeds and eating? Did they really have to do anything? Well, the reality is something has to be done, because God put man in the garden and commanded him, to eat, so we had to eat it, but there was a cultivating it and a keeping it. So there's some aspect that we see from that first book of Genesis. Also, there's the idea that he named the livestock and the wild animals. So animal husbandry even existed in some sense, is that he wasn't necessarily naming them Rover or Chick or whatever, but somehow God gave him this role with plants and animals that established that relationship in paradise. And as you read about this, there's numerous individuals, when you get into the idea of the curse of the world through the fall of man and sin, there are different theologians have different ideas about were there carnivores among the animals before the fall? Were there, meat eaters in the oceans versus not on the land? And then when we look at the end of the Bible, Revelation, we know the lion will lay with the lamb, which gives you this picture that carnivorous devouring of animals, because if you put a lion with a lamb, he's got to have a really good constitution or be the cowardly lion from Wizard of Oz if he's not going to eat it like that, because that would just be a snack for a lion. So when we look at that, it's unique. But then comes the fall, and we see that the ground was cursed, and from it become thorn and thistle. And so there's this ongoing debate of, was the garden different from the ground? How did the curse hit us? But oftentimes throughout church history and when you see sermons and writings, many times the concept of the garden and tilling and keeping, and then the curse of man is related to work, because the only semblance we see of work for man in the garden was to till and to keep it. It truly was paradise. So that there was the idea that Adam and Eve didn't have to necessarily prune the trees or plant the trees. God had put them there, and they were there for them to eat. But there was an aspect of stewarding, of caring for those type things. So then when the fall comes, it's different. So this picture that work was given to man, but was that work pleasurable before the fall? And so there's debate on that, but I like to think that the idea that in the Garden of Eden, it was like that perfect garden that rather than having to do all the weeding and all the planting and all the killing of the insects, the Garden of Eden is like you walk out there in the middle of summer and all the tomatoes are there for you, all the onions, the potatoes have already been dug up. It's just kind of like, let's go and harvest and enjoy and eat. Well, you see there that there was a garden. We had to cultivate it. We had to keep it, but we may eat freely from it. But then with the fall, rather than a garden, man is put out of the garden, and so there's the ground that is thus cursed, and there's thorns and thistles, and there's toil. So many, especially when you study the idea of voco, the calling, that work is not cursed. We had work in the garden, but that aspect that work became hard happened after the fall. Though you'll find scholars kind of on both sides saying things, I just think as I've read and seen that, and especially as we look at what we're called to be stewards and faithful with in the New Testament, there's a reality that part of the purpose of man did come with stewardship and care of whatever aspect that was. Well, here at Clemson, I like to think about agricultural history. Of course, that's what I'm steeped in with my life. But if you're familiar with the land grant system, you can't ignore agricultural history as an educational institution. I think many do choose to ignore it. In fact, several of our Northeastern land grants no longer have their original missions in their schools. They've parsed them out to other schools. There's literally, I can regularly get people that don't know I'm in agriculture. They'll talk about why in the world is agriculture here. It's such a bother. It's such a pain. Why do they get the attention? But if we understand our history, that's just not where we have come from, nor is it where we're going, because without agriculture, if we didn't have agriculture and forestry, where would we be as a society? This is a question we asked our students asked their peers at Clemson. If we didn't have agriculture and forestry, where would we be as a society?
Nothing to eat.
Starving.
We'd be starving. The answer our students have, they have this great T-shirt that says, "Where would you be without agriculture and forestry?" on the front. And on the back, it's got this very thin tiger that's holding a word in front of him that says, "naked, skinny, and homeless." And that when we consider where we have come, the toil of agriculture is what often provides our basic needs for living. And many have stated that the land grant institution is the most successful experiment ever, and that when we understand when the land grant was established to what it has done, agriculture has basically put itself out of business, and that when the land grant started, literally fully about 80 to 90% of our culture came from a farm, was associated with a farm, was going to a farm to get their products, was associated. We were an agrarian society when it started. Now about 3% of our population work in agriculture. And so what does this mean for us? Well, the Justin-Norrell Act started the land grant system. Clemson was established in 1889, and then extension came along in 1914. Why do I think this is important is, I want us to recognize as Christian faculty that we are working at a land grant institution. We're not at a Christian private institution. We're not at a purely technological school. We are at a school that, because of our land grant heritage, the students in which we are engaged with do have a unique profile. And what's unique about Clemson Extension, or the Extension Service, is the Clemson model was used to put forth nationally in that Frank Lever was from South Carolina here, and so the Clemson model was used to expand what the land grant did around not only the nation, but the world. And what's unique about Clemson is that as a land grant in South Carolina, does anybody know what the premises of the land grant of the Justin-Norrell Act was? Does anybody know what that uniquely did in America? How many of you have heard of the Justin-Norrell Act?
Agriculture and the practical sciences, and including instruction in military tactics.
Mm-hmm. I was hoping you would know that, yes.
And American colleges before then had really focused on the classics.
Yes.
Yes.
And they were based out of the church. Most higher education institutions had started from the church with the goal for individuals to be able to read the Bible. I mean, if you look at the Ivy Leagues and look at their original charters, and to take the gospel to the end of the verse. So, when the land grant came, it was very unique. Now, why does anybody know why it's called the land grant? Why was it called land grant?
We got 22,000 acres of land.
Each state was given a land grant, and the government gave them
Yes.
land to go with it.
Yes, 30,000 acres per representative. And so one of the interesting about South Carolina is we still have significant acreage of our land grant.
So we had 30,000?
It was per representative member. So we had 30,000, but
we may have close to that still with the PD research center.
Well, we do, and the reason why do we still many states don't have any of their acreage.
They sold it.
Because they sold it. In South Carolina, we still have a significant number of our acreage, and why? It's up there on the screen.
Clemson's will.
Thomas Green Clemson's will gave us the entire Fort Hill plantation. So that really helped us, because does anybody know where the original land grant institution in South Carolina was? In fact, there's a sign on the corner of a street that says...
Well, they tried to make it University of South Carolina, but that was...
It was until 1889, it was, and there's a sign that's still up right there on Gervais that says the original land grant institution of South Carolina.
Was South Carolina.
And some say that really started the rivalry, because we took all those federal dollars from Columbia, and Thomas Green Clemson bought up here, and it was only by one vote that the will was accepted and ratified.
They weren't using those dollars to really teach agriculture.
Yes,
So.
they weren't. And so that makes us unique, and that's just a little bit of our history that I think can still matter today if we understand it and know it. And why do I think it matters? Well, because I think this call for stewardship that we see in Genesis extends throughout time for God's children, in that one of the key aspects of stewardship is faithfulness. And as a believer here at our campus, we're given the opportunity to be faithful every day with what we do, as well as that idea of how we're using the gifts, talents, and skills God has given us. And we see in Luke, there's two examples of where Christ calls on this concept of stewardship. And of course, many of his parables were based in agrarian ideas, because so much of the culture understood it. So when he's talking about tending a vine, he wasn't just talking ethereal. Many of the people fully understood why a vine would live or die, or certain aspects of sowing and reaping that we see. As well as in the epistles, we see that there's an aspect of being faithful and sharing and carrying on what you do, as well as this concept of eating is linked to what you work, what you do. So These are overarching principles that, not necessarily getting down into the full outgrowth of what we are called to do as tillers and keepers, but just the idea that do we recognize that from the beginning, Adam and Eve, our mother and father from the beginning of all creation, were first given this aspect of being agricultural stewards. And all of us are not stewards now, but there's this idea of what does the call to stewardship mean for faculty at a modern land grant institution. And so as I ask that question, that's where I just want some discussion, meaning understanding that we're a land grant institution. One of the most important things, as Rod said, they were given land for the mechanical, agricultural arts and the military arts. That was kind of the curricula, but what did it truly do for education in America? It opened us up to who? To get a higher education.
People that didn't have so much money.
Ordinary people could go.
Ordinary people could go. And that's the literature of my grandfather could tell the story of remembering when the state representative came to his house and said, Blaine, I think, or Pete, I think you should send your son to Clemson to get an education. I mean, it was still, and if you've ever read the first circular sent out from the state legislature that was sent out 3 years before Clemson was to open, they were recruiting men to come to Clemson who normally would not have gone to school. So in a sense, I've always thought of the land grant truly, historically, has recruited from the highways and byways for those to come get education. We here at Clemson still have a population of first-generation students that are coming to college for the first time. So as you consider those realities, and you think about that you're a steward of the gospel, you're a steward of all that has been given to you educationally, what does stewardship mean for faculty at a modern land grant institution? That's kind of just what I want us to discuss briefly here. Thinking about it in a way, taking your head out of your silo of your discipline and your expertise, recognizing, yes, that's a little pun there, and looking to, the students that we've got, what our reality is of equipping. When you think about being a steward as a faculty member at Clemson University in this garden, what do you think are the important realities of that? And talk good and loud so we can pick you up on the blue snowball.
I think when I'm teaching students, I don't just see myself teaching the subject. I see everything I do as setting an example, the way I treat them, the way I expect them to treat me. So I think that it's a very holistic one that, I may not be throwing my faith at them, flat in their face, but, living that faith and trying to do that. I think that's what, and that's what when I see them after they graduated, that's what I'm looking for. I'm not looking to see if they know that much more about the subject matter. I'm looking to see if they've turned out to be a person that's really helping the world and making a difference.
And how long have you been in graphics at Clemson?
28 years.
28 years. So that's an idea of influence, not just transference of information.
Right. I call them the unwritten objectives of the class. That when you leave, and some of them are professional, but some of them are faith-based and just work ethic and all.
Good. Who else?
Sometimes I think, a lot of our students who come here, they do come from a Christian background. And now they're out on their own, they're being exposed to other things and perhaps getting the message that it's not sophisticated to be a Christian. And perhaps when they know that some of their faculty who have PhDs and are supposedly smart people are believers too, then it's okay to understand that their faith is intellectually defensible. And I think that's just our presence here, if we set a good example, can be a positive thing.
Yes, very good. Who else?
I think there's a tendency, because of the tremendous numbers that are applying to Clemson, so and getting to the top 20 means certain SAT scores and all that, you're getting an awful lot of the cream of the crop, not the average person coming to school, at least on that entering freshman. But then we have all these transfers that's another way to get in, and I begin to hear some faculty talking about, those transfer students, that they're not as ready, and it's true many times. They're not as ready, as those cream of the crop freshmen that came in as freshmen. But then how do we handle that? Do we dismiss them because they're lesser, or is that our opportunity to really be a land grant school and help those kids get through? They may not make the A's and they may not make the best, papers or whatever, but do they become, like John said, a positive contributing member of society and a good, solid person?
Yeah.
So I think that's a challenge before a lot of the faculty.
Yeah, I'd like to hear what the engineers have to say in that y'all, the idea of transference of information for y'all is crucial in the knowledge of a principle that if you don't have it, you're not going to succeed. Mark, you were going to say something?
Well, but I wasn't going to talk about that. I was just going to say how I kind of miss, as the tuition has gotten real higher and higher over the years, and Clemson has become more elitist. And those students, there's not nearly as many of those students as there used to be, and it saddens me some. And so, there's a lot more privileged kids here. And
I think much is given, much is required. I used to see that student that was so thankful and grateful to be here that they would just give and give. Even if they couldn't get a principal, they would demonstrate a desire to succeed.
I kind of seek those kids out, and part of it being is those kids that have grown up on farms and stuff and have done something other than just playing on a computer. Maybe they got their hands dirty a little bit. They end up being really good researchers. They, even though they don't make as good grades in the classroom, they know how to apply it better in the lab, some of them. So anyway, I wish there was a few more. I kind of miss that.
And fortunately, Clemson is doing some things to try to help that. Our bridge program is something that was established for that purpose, to say yes to students that Clemson does think you can be amenable. There's been as an academic recruiter, I would go around and constantly hear, what are y'all trying to be, Harvard of the South? And so many legacies that used to get in don't get in, and academically they can still be successful. In other words, all the logarithmic formula that gives your predicted grade point ratio, their predicted grade point ratio is way above what it needs to be for graduation. But supply and demand has created an issue that entitles students. We got an email back. I work with stewardship for students writing thank you notes for scholarships to donors. We do it through a group of stewardship coordinators. We got an email that was circulated just to show our issue of a culture of gratitude from a student asking to be taken off this email list, not to be sent. He did not need to say thank you to anyone. They had earned this scholarship, and therefore, please quit bothering them. It infuriated us, but that's entitlement culture at its fullest, and I think that's true. What does the principle of grace have to do with us as faculty members? And I think the gentleman from Auburn gave some really great points when he was here in regard to how grace truly can impact what we do with students and with peers, peer faculty members and our administrators.
Well, my thoughts on even on the first question on stewardship, I think part of what we have as a responsibility to do as Christian faculty is to be balanced, to not just, it's possible to be successful professionally by cutting out everything except just bring in the money and produce the papers and graduate PhDs, and they'll smile at you and give you big raises, and but I feel like we have a responsibility to do the whole package, which includes really working hard at becoming the best undergraduate teacher you can, taking advising seriously, and even just serving the university on committees and those kinds of things. And actually, I've been pleasantly surprised as I've stepped up more in administrative tasks this year, just how many of you all, the Christians, are on these committees. It's like a reunion of faculty commons in some cases, and that's been a pleasant surprise. But yeah, we have a responsibility just to keep the ship afloat, I think. There are things that have to get done, and if you're totally set on yourself and just succeeding by their measures, the university cannot function. So part of stewardship is that.
And is it interesting? It's called serving on a committee. I mean, it's
Yeah.
service in that aspect.
I wanted to add, because when you asked about the engineering on the first question, the principles in the Bible, when it talks about, like, you reap what you sow, you know, so many of my students don't understand that principle because they take all these shortcuts and they don't seem to understand that that's not the way life works. You can't take shortcuts, and, you know, like, out in the real world, gravity is always enforced, you know, and you just can't, you know. So I write difficult tests because I want to communicate to them that you need to know this. Your boss is going to give you a good salary because he or she expects that you know what you're doing, and you're not going to go take the next class if I don't give you a good grade, but you're not going to do well there if I don't give you a good grade, you know. And it seems like the most devout people in my department are the toughest teachers in terms of what we expect of students and what we ask of them. And I'm not out to get my students. I try really hard to teach well, but I feel like I have an obligation to prepare them well for what's to come, an obligation to society, but to help them grow up and recognize, look, if you're going to be late, if you're going to be disrespectful, you know, to give them consequences that will prepare them to be successful as professionals. So we want to send them out as prepared, but if we give them everything on a silver platter, or we don't give them consequences, then that's not really going to serve them well. So, I mean, it's a lot easier. I would get much better evaluations if I gave easy exams. And I certainly would spend less time grading if I gave easy exams.
Yeah, exactly right. It takes much more time to do what you're saying, Melissa, than just.
So it's not,
casually.
you know, they wouldn't perceive me probably not as the most gracious person around, but there's that balance of grace and responsibility.
Yeah.
So from engineering especially, I mean, like, there's certain absolutes, and you can't fudge that.
Yeah.
So.
As an acquaintance at A&M, she's a good friend of one of the faculty in the department, and I'm pretty sure she's a Christian too, and she says, students ask her, she's in chemical engineering, and the students ask her about their grade, and she goes, I can't do that, you could kill somebody.
Yeah, and that's true. And so in relation to our students, in relation to our authorities, and in relation to this tradition of faculty to challenge the status quo, and the reason this is so interesting for me is that for 27 years, I have served this institution as a quasi-staff administrator. I mean, I'm at Faculty Commons, and I'm not a faculty member. Why am I at Faculty Commons? Is because John Lancaster came to see me and said, Kirby, you should be part of this group. And I'm about 7, 8 months in, and he realizes you're not a faculty member. You know what? I'm like, yeah, I know, but I just wanted to come anyway, and because John and I were in school together. And so, but I'm now in the process of becoming a faculty member, and was asked to help teach my first class this semester. And so I'm slowly peering behind the wizard's curtain at the end of the thing, and and there's so many interesting concepts, and I'm just gonna give this word picture. I had the tradition of faculty to challenge the status quo. Well, where I have sat, there's just been this interesting miracle that I see happen again and again, that I call the power of the revolution, and that I have had. I guess I'm on my 10th dean or 9th dean now, my 27 years. So I have watched beloved faculty from the college come into the dean's office and put on the nomenclature administrator. And they walked in as Luke Skywalker, and in a matter of 2 to 3 weeks, they are Darth Vader. So that has caused me to really question the viability of why, as a faculty member, do you do this? And so it's caused me to think, as I'm now kind of going to some of these departmental meetings, and because I'm potentially becoming part of this, and I am a lecturer, so I guess John could have come to me as a lecturer, but I wasn't really teaching. I even asked, as Christians, how do we appropriately challenge authorities, challenge the status quo in a way that we are being a salt and light to administrators. And I don't know if any of you read the article John sent out, I guess 2 or 3 weeks ago, about the faculty member who's retiring after 30 years at the institution, and his greatest compliment was the provost said, "You know, this university won't be the same institution without you." And he was somebody who had served on committees, who had sought to balance all the teaching over those years. And then he tells the story of he believed his greatest influence came when he was somewhat, by the statements of the university and the community, mistreated by a dean who was booted out as they were leaving, did not give them a reappointment as a department chair. And he said the way he responded to that became his greatest testimony at the institution. In that the years following that, he had more individuals come to him to talk about challenges and life issues. And he said it gave him the greatest opportunity for the gospel with his fellow faculty members than ever had. So that principle of 828, that what others might, that God uses everything for good, or, you know, as Joseph states, you know, what you meant for evil, God meant for good. He saw that principle in his life. And so many times as faculty, I perceive y'all are having to fight against things, but recognizing that I believe in that we can be stewards of the grace we've been given in the gospel. And so that's why I find these questions so intriguing, as I'm moving from the concept of being a servant who has served faculty all these years to now being in a classroom, and I've got 46 students in a critical thinking class with all written presentation projects, so this concept of the hours and hours. So as I pull that curtain back, I'm amazed at what faculty do, but it's causing me to have questions, and that's why I've been encouraged to be in here amongst longtime faculty, hearing what you say. So the final question to think about is, in what way might I be salt and light in the garden and on the ground where I have been placed? Because I know it is not easy. I can see it's not easy being a faculty member and what's expected of us as faculty. But then again, how we represent ourselves. And this I'll give you this last example of what's happening in my college. Like I've had bunches of deans, we have had countless meetings, more than the rest of the institution, on reorganizing our college, reorganizing PSA in the last 27 years. One's going on right now over at the Brooks Center. I'm missing it's being recorded, so I'll be able to see it too. But for years, our faculty argued with the structure we have. What got put in place is what I heard they wanted. And I received my first email this week with terms like czar and other things in it already. So just trying to understand that is something I'm grappling with as I do my quiet time, as I'm reading and looking into how God would have me, you know, be an Esther in the midst of all those kind of things, of straddling both fences. You know, so I hope that we are all in Faculty Commons asking this question about being light in the garden, understanding that Clemson's a land grant, and we still do have some of those unique opportunities with first-generation students, with transfer students. And from our college, we've got, when I first came here, we had 334 students studying ag. We've got over 1,200 studying ag. So there's a lot more of those kids that know how to get dirty and want to be with animals and wear big belt buckles and boots, and you have to tell them don't spit and chew, and you know, those are our kids. Those are my kids, you know. And the funny thing is, somebody comes from a city and is not like that. Give them a year with those students, and they're in Dockers and tennis shoes at the first thing of the year, and then I see them at the end of the year and they've got a big belt buckle with boots on and jeans, and so they become what we call agriculturalists. They don't come from a farm and ag background. So any other comments anybody has?
Just one comment in your first premise. The first farmer or agriculturalist was God himself.
That's right.
He told me to create.
He did.
So it's a divine activity.
It is.
As well as you.
Yeah. And that's true. And it didn't even get into there's a whole venue of people that talk about were weeds in existence when God, it said God caused the trees and fruit tree to bear up. Did he have to make weeds with the curse, or were weeds still out? Did God make weeds the first time, or did he make them as a function of the curse? as the first farmer. And so it's amazing how over the years the different theologians that have wrestled and written about those types of things.
My wife's not a theologian, but she's sure that aphids will not be in heaven. They will not bother the roses.
Yeah. Right. All right, well, I encourage you to get out there and be salt and light, and thank you for all the work that you're doing for Clemson. It makes a difference in the lives of our students.
Thank you very much, Tom. Any other questions or